Welcome to our next week of looking at Agnostic number 2 and looking at the intellectual honesty challenge. I hope you have started reading the Gospel of John, these eyewitness accounts for yourself. Question is Jesus Christ in the Easter message a fraud, or is he indeed the Son of God? And if so, it hinges upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. As you recall, if you've watched with me previous weeks, we're starting to look at 5 eyewitnesses of Easter, 3 of which were agnostics, 1 a blundering failure, and finally the testimony of a tormented woman. I hope you will read these eyewitness stories between now and Easter, because it hinges upon the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead. Tonight we're going to look at eyewitness number 2, agnostic number 2. He was a hardened realist. He had seen and had given out brutality and hatred of his own. He was someone who despised faith. He wasn't a person prone to sentimentality, but he was a sturdy and reliable, respected leader. If we were to say, how would he view life, perhaps he would view it somewhat like this, with the idea of, there's not a religion that can survive the question, prove it. He's someone that had no use for religion. He'd seen a lot of life. He was good at what he did, and he didn't waste time on emotion and sentimentality. He was a tough realist. In fact, he would say, I can only trust what I can see and prove. And indeed, the gospel story does stand up to the scrutiny of intellectual honesty. That's why I'm encouraging you to read it. In fact, I'm going to encourage you to research a quote that probably would have described how he felt. And who said these words? I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel. Agnostic number 2 would probably have embraced those words, though he lived many centuries before they were said. So who was he? Who was agnostic number 2? A man, again, as we mentioned, trusted for his efficiency and his brutality, and he had a tough assignment, and he did it well. He was the Roman centurion. Centurion meaning a leader of 100 men. He was the one entrusted to make sure that Jesus died a cruel, brutal, and undisputed death, with no one having a chance to intervene. He was a man who had no use for God, or faith, or Jesus Christ, or his followers. Someone that was obviously respected by Rome to have been entrusted with this type of a responsibility, respected for his brutality and his cruelty to the enemies of Rome. And this was probably going to be the most high execution of his career. This was his profile, and his reputation was on the line. History and tradition said his name was Longinus, although the Bible really only records him as the main centurion in charge of the execution. He saw faith as a problem, not a solution. He was a realist, and he had seen in his lifetime the problems that religion produces. He was a leader of other soldiers, he was hardened by life, and he was someone who only looked at the facts. He had overseen probably many executions before, and he was chosen again because of his brutality and effectiveness in striking fear into the enemies of Rome. So what did he find this time? He found that the evidence was overwhelming. Probably he knew very little of who Jesus was. He knew nothing of the scriptures. The only thing that he knew and that led him to his confession was what he saw of Jesus Christ during the mock trial before Pilate and during the hours that Jesus hung on the cross. And yet that evidence alone was overwhelming to this hardened realist. And this is not from the Gospel of John, it's from one of the other Gospels, but the Gospel of Mark tells us when the crucifixion was over, this man, Longinus, said, he stood there in front of Jesus and he said, after seeing how Jesus had died, surely this man was the Son of God. Now, what does it mean when he says that? More truth is revealed to those who want to know it and follow it. So do you really care? Would it really matter to you if you knew more of the truth? Longinus, our centurion, risked a lot when he made this statement. When you think of him and why he was chosen to have any show of emotion, much less an expression of faith and belief in Jesus as the Son of God. I mean, his career, his respect, perhaps even his life was on the line. Yet that didn't deter him in the slightest from what he had seen and believed to be the truth. As you're reading through the Gospel of John, I hope you'll stop for a moment on John 3:16, because it really, in a nutshell, gives the heart of the Gospel story. That God loved the world so that he gave his only begotten Son, Jesus, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life. So I hope you're accepting the challenge to read the story from the Gospel of John and ask God to lead you to the truth, just as he did to this hardened realist, agnostic number 2, who history tells us was named Longinus. Next week, we'll be looking at eyewitness number 3, who was also an agnostic. He was someone whose life would be summed up by poor choices, perhaps by many considered a wasted life, and someone who found that he almost waited too long. And as I've said every week, the only reason to believe the gospel story and believe that Jesus is indeed God who came in human flesh to reveal God to us, the only reason to believe that is because it's true. So I hope you'll take the intellectual honesty challenge. I hope you're already reading through the Gospel of John, because we want to finish it before Easter. And I'll look forward to seeing you next week. Have a good one.